Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With the breeding season upon us, dairy specialist Stuart Childs gives us his top tips to maximise submission rate on your farm. But first, I asked him about the importance of detecting heat pre-breeding.
Well, Emma-Louise, in order to get cows in calf in an appropriate time fashion, I think it's important that people do some sort of pre-breeding. A lot of people are possibly allergic to the thought of that, but what we would be recommending is that people would tail paint the entire herd around now, and just with minimal observation, just observe what cows are showing heat between here and the start of breeding. And obviously then the cows that haven't shown heat will be cows that should probably be examined early on in order to make sure that they're going to maximise their submission rate.
And I guess if we look at, say, a breeding start date, so people had a rigid date that they always started their AI and the breeding season on in the past. And I suppose in recent springs there's been debates, should we start a bit later, a little bit earlier? What factors should people consider when looking at the particular date for their farm?
I think the most important factor all the time is your general grass situation. In a normal type of year, there was possibly quite a knee-jerk reaction in response to the spring that was 2017, and people delayed start of calving or start of breeding, obviously in 18, and the and calving date then in 18 was affected, or 19 was affected by that as a result. And obviously people then found that they were struggling to get through grass covers this year, because we actually had a better than normal spring even. So I would say that what you said in terms of people normally having a kind of a date that they normally stick to, I think that probably still applies in terms of as long as you're happy that it's working for your farm. What we would see is you probably, as you go closer to Cork City, you probably have an earlier start date. As you come up around here, around Moore Park, you're probably looking at kind of 25th of April, kind of start of breeding, which is going to be 1st of February. But people should bear in mind that there is a good chance that there's going to be 10 to 15% of the herd calved before that stage, by that stage. Now, from my own personal point of view, I think that's possibly not a bad thing, that you have a small proportion of the herd calved in advance of the 1st of February, which allows you to go to grass more or less straight away, weather allowing, on the 1st of February, and helps you hit the targets. But if you're extremely compact calving, it is possibly advisable to push your start date to start for the 7th of February, but actually be calving by the 1st of February. And
you mentioned around the 1st of February here around the Moore Park area, and as if we move up the country, an example could be like the Ballyhays farm, they push out calving a little bit further. So you would imagine if somebody had a calving start date of the 15th of February, you actually will have cows starting to calve around the 7th and from then on.
Correct, yeah. And I suppose the other thing is, as we move north, everything does push that little bit later, so it's justifiable to push the calving date that bit later too, in order to tie in with grass growth.
And a follow-up then in terms of heat detection, where you're finding cows are not cycling in your pre-breeding period, what sort of steps should you take to deal with those cows?
Firstly, I suppose, as well as the non-cyclers, I think it's important that as long as people have good records, any cow that has had hard calving, maybe retained fetal membranes, had milk fever or ketosis, should be also examined, even if they have shown heat. It's only going to be a small proportion of cows, and the person is going to be in the yard to scan anyway. So I think it's advisable, as previous history would possibly suggest, that there are cows that do actually show heat but potentially may not go in calf ultimately, so it's worth scanning those when you're scanning the other non-cyclers. Then in terms of what you do with them, I suppose our key objective is to maximise our submission rate in the first 3 weeks. We want to target 90%. In order to do that, we have to identify these non-cyclers early, and we have to treat them appropriately. Depending on who you'll talk to now, some people would suggest that if they're greater than 35 days calved, they should be put on a normal synchronization protocol. Others will just maybe give a shot of prostaglandin if they look like they're coming in heat and just need the encouragement of the prostaglandin. Again, the scanners are the best people to advise in this case, but the important thing is to try to identify these possibly in the first week of breeding ideally, and that's where your pre-breeding tail painting comes into play. and have those cows submitted in the first 3 weeks. That's going to be the key driver to pushing up the 6-week calving rate for 2020.
And I mean, going back to that, and that was, a question that I was going to come to, was the submission rate, and you're setting a target of 90% for the first 3 weeks. When we look at that figure, are we talking about 90% of cows available for breeding, or do we include all cows in the herd?
We're talking about the cows that you intend to have for next year. So obviously, if you've cows identified for culling, you will not be trying to breed these. So you'll be leaving them out of the calculation for your 90%. I suppose the key thing is that the cull cows are identified early, and maybe some way of preventing them coming into heat is considered. So maybe putting a prid or a seeder into them could actually stop them coming bulling, and it avoids the scenario where they get put in calf by accident in the heat of AI season, basically, and they're around for another year then.
And then if you consider a late calver on the farm, so say for argument's sake, a cow that calves today, and you're saying maybe 35 days time they'll start cycling again. Do we include those cows in our 90% target for the submission rate, or are they taken out of that calculation?
Any cow that's calved on mating start date is going to be considered in that 90%. So just to come back on those cows that are just calving at the moment, it is probably advisable that they would, subject to being clear to going into the tank following withdrawals, etc., be put on once a day. Up until they're bred potentially, because people should bear in mind that notwithstanding that we've slightly lower growth at the minute, maybe, which might be putting pressure on grass situations on farms currently, but the situation is with those animals is that they're actually going out with lower level of intake than a lot of the other herd, and if you're pushing them to the same level as you're pushing the main herd, they're not actually getting in the energy that they require, so that's actually going to further delay their return to cyclicity. So if we can put them on once a day, we obviously lower their energy demand, keep feeding them as normal with the rest of the herd, then they will have slightly lower milk yield, but you'll gain it in terms of the earlier going back in calf earlier and being available then to produce milk earlier in the season the coming year.
And I suppose ideally then we hit our 90% 3-week submission rate. What do we expect to see then in terms of performance when we talk about conception rates, say our 6-week calving rate, as a result of that?
Yeah, I think generally the figure that we always work off of would be 60%. You can get higher if very fertile herds can touch up on 65% potentially. But in general, you're working off a 60% conception rate.
Okay. And then if we turn our attention to the cow, and you've alluded to once a day for late calvers, if we talk about other strategies, I suppose, to make sure cows are, fit for breeding and in good condition when it comes to breeding, is once a day an option for the whole herd or particular cows within the herd?
Yeah, I suppose in general, this year has been a good year to cows. We've had relatively good conditions with the exception of 1 week through the spring, so cows have gotten full value out of any grass that they have consumed. Probably been on 3 to 4 kilos a meal along with that, so they're in good order in general. I suppose coming back to the cows that I pointed out earlier in terms of retained fetal membranes, hard calvings, etc., if they're under pressure, maybe they could be considered for once a day. So any cow that has lost significant amount of body condition since calving or is less than 2.5 or around the 2.5 mark now even currently should be put on once a day until bred.
And then in terms of the observation of heat, what are the main, I suppose, aids that you see on farms at the moment?
Yeah, the main aid is obviously tail paint. Scratch cards are becoming popular, particularly in heifers, but I see a few more herds beginning to move in that direction for cows also. Bit of time involved in putting them on, but they stay on until the cow is bulling at least, whereas tail paint has to be topped up constantly. I suppose from the point of view of tail paint, it's only as effective as the effectiveness of the tail painting regime. So there's a new product actually on the market there, tailpainter.com. I think it's a Cork-based crowd making a tail painting roller that can be applied tail paint can be applied in the milking parlour from the ground rather than having to hop up and down, which is probably one of the main reasons that people actually don't top up tail paint. There's also another paint roller available that's suited to the cow's tail head that can be used from the pit as well, so that might be worth looking at for people in order to try and maximise their tail painting abilities, I suppose, during the course of the breeding season. The other thing that has really, really been effective at farm level in terms of increasing submission rates have been vasectomized bulls. Potentially getting a little bit late now at this stage to get a bull done, but it's a good idea maybe if there was a calf left, a male Frisian calf or crossbred calf or something left over from the spring, so that you might retain them and actually vasectomise them the coming year. Anywhere they have been kept, there's been a significant increase in the 6-week calving rate as a result of them. The other thing which I do see coming in more and more in the last couple of years is the automation of tail paint, or the automation of heat detection through the likes of the moo monitors and other various systems like that. And yes, they're expensive, but they probably do have a role to play in terms of herd sizes and labour efficiency and so forth, where labour is unavailable on farms. Maybe they can help. So they definitely are effective. And some herds are relying on these now completely without any tail paint. Others probably like the reassurance of the tail paint still, but they can be used to great effect to increase submission rates as well. So if you have the money and you're willing to spend it, it's a good place to spend it potentially.
And to pick up then on the vasectomized bull, we see there's recommendations in terms of the ratio of cows to bulls, say when you're looking at a mop-up bull. Is there any recommendation in terms of vasectomized bulls? What sort of power have they?
Yeah, I suppose the recommendation with the cow herd anyway would be that you wouldn't have a vasectomized bull left off for the first 3 weeks, because there should be sufficient heat activity. Generally, if you take your herd size and divide it by 20 or 21, you should have a number of how many cows you'd be expecting to be bulling on any particular day during your breeding season, for the first 3 weeks in particular. And subsequently then, when heat activity begins to drop off, when we have 60% in calf to our first service, obviously then our vasectomized bull can come in. So the herd size is going to be important. It probably is the same really as your normal bull. So you're expecting a young bull to be capable of handling 15 to 20 cows. A mature bull probably would handle 20 to 30 cows. So if you apply the same ratios to the vasectomized bulls, then you're going to have possibly one or two at least available on the kind of average size herd that we're dealing with now.
And then is there a role for rotation within the system there?
Yeah, definitely, because they especially with the younger bull, they tend to be very active in terms of patrolling the farm, and they actually could spend a lot of the day patrolling and not actually grazing at all. So they get very tired and get spun out quite quickly. So there is probably merit in stepping them off basically for 24 hours and swapping in the other bull for the next 24 hours. Yeah, good point.
And I suppose there is a health and safety warning with a vasectomized bull. They mightn't be a full bull, but they're they're still a danger within the system.
Yeah, I suppose the one thing about them is that I suppose the beauty of them is that if they do get crossed, they can be got rid of straight away, whereas you're probably less likely to do it with a normal bull.
Finally then, when we're talking about heat detection, I suppose in the past, if we look back years and years ago, there would have been no I suppose aids to help us with observation, and it was all visual observation. Is there a role of on farms to continue visual observation as well as using something like your tail paint, your scratch card or your automation?
I think, I suppose, to be fair, huge success is available or is visible on farm from just tail paint and observing at milking times. I think it's a very good point to stand up at the back of the pit as cows are going into the parlour, especially with bigger herds, because it's very hard to see what cows are jumping on the way into the parlour because of the distance that you might be behind the herd. So standing up at the back of the parlour to see what tail paint has come off on the way in. However, if your performance is less than adequate, I suppose, in the last number of years, then extra observations may not be a bad thing. So I would say that you may be being conscious of the amount of time that people have available. Maybe putting in an observation period of 20 to 25 minutes in the middle of the day might be another opportunity to identify cows that are bulling at that time. But other than that, it's becoming excessively cumbersome, I think, in terms of labour demands and so forth. Again, it depends on what works for people. I think if something's working for you, don't change it. But if it's not working, it obviously needs to be changed. So,
And finally then, Stuart, we've talked an awful lot about the cows, but we might turn our attention to the heifers for a few minutes. Say heifers, there's a variation. Some are on site on farms and some are on an out farm. They have a huge role to play in terms of hitting our targets, particularly if we mentioned here our 90% 3-week submission rate. I suppose, should they be treated differently, or is it the same sort of protocol as you would have with cows?
Yeah, I think it's good that you mention it, and especially the fact that they can have varying locations on farms. I think there are many options for people. Quite often people take the easy option in terms of the heifers because they're away from the farm and you let off a bull with them, and you're missing out on genetic gain in that sense as well then, because more likely than not it's going to be an Angus bull that will be left with them for ease of calving. So I would probably look at the options that are available in terms of fixed time AI maybe. The potential is there. You have ordinary protocols for synchronizing heifers as well, which will be breeding for the first 6 to 7 days and then injecting with prostaglandin to bring in the remainder of the heifers to get your heat detection in your heifers completed within 10 to 12 days. As I said, fixed time AI is a possibility where you could handle the heifers in 3 different days and have them all bred. So people should look at that in order to try and use the dairy AI as much as possible rather than wasting a generation with a beef straw as well. I think the big thing from my perspective for people doing these protocols, be it in cows or in heifers, is to write out the days according to the protocol. So if you're starting Monday, have the day beside it, because quite often there's a bit of confusion between day 0 and day 1, etc. So I think if it's written out on paper, Monday injection 1, Tuesday injection 2, etc., it leads to greater success rates.
And could you just talk us through like the detail of fixed time AI, just so that we're clear on what you're talking about?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of the cows in particular, which will be ones where cows are being treated for not cycling, day 0, we'll say, which will be generally a Monday, I suppose, would be a good day to start, but whatever day it is, you'd insert the cedar and inject with GnRH, which is to produce an egg basically. The following Monday then you're injecting with prostaglandin and removing the cedar. This is in order to try and get them to ovulate. On the 1st of May, which is day 9 then, in that scenario you're going to be injecting with GnRH to cause ovulation again, and then you're inseminating the following day then 16 to 20 hours afterwards. So we'll say you have an AM, PM and AM kind of scenario there. So as I said, it can cause confusion. It quite often does. And if you talk to people in the trade who are working as vets or scanning, maybe they will say that it's the protocols that where people slip up, where they don't work. These will work if they're done right. Now, obviously, you can't guarantee 100% conception rate, but assuming all the steps are followed, you will have relatively high success with these protocols. So
you're talking, just to recap, you're talking your day 0 is typically a Monday on farms, and then there's no treatment again until the following Monday,
yeah.
And then you're talking about then 2 days after that in the afternoon you're injecting again, and then it's the following morning, so the Thursday morning is the AI and the submission. It's interesting that you mentioned the stock bull as well, and there's a lot of people using the stock bull, I suppose, out of convenience, and I suppose we can't emphasise enough, I suppose, firstly that our heifers are the most genetically the highest genetic merit in our herd, and also when we look at stock bulls, where you're using a stock bull, it needs to be a very high EBI stock bull. If we would have spoken to people like Kevin Downing here, and he would have said that the stock bull is so far behind your average team of bulls that we're using for our cows.
Absolutely, yeah. I couldn't. I actually find it very hard to stand over anyone using a Frisian stock bull on heifers, because it's just compromising the future of the herd far too much. I'd nearly rather a person use an Angus bull on heifers rather than use a Frisian bull. AI should be used wherever possible in order to maximise the genetic potential. The benefits of EBI are well proven at this stage, and they should be maximised where possible. So breeding the heifers to dairy AI is key.
So I think that's a great note to finish on, Stuart, and I suppose we've a really good roadmap to all the steps that you've given us, I suppose, to target our 90% submission rate to have a successful breeding season for 2019. Thank you. That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Stuart Childs for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.